while others, born into poverty with aptitude, willingness, and determination, walk a much more perilous road. But what of those without aptitude, who have had the willingness and determination stripped from their souls by the devious machinations of the unscrupulous, or simply put, the greedy? What, if anything, do we owe them? It's an excerpt from the History of Material Values. Chapter 1, Time to Take a Walk. Jimmy emerged from his home, and looking back, he recognized this as the morning after the first day of the rest of his life. And without a doubt, with absolute certainty, if one truth could be told and carved in stone like the faces on Mount Rushmore, he was lost. He awoke in the morning confused, and not having taken his head from the pillow yet. He couldn't remember the dreams from the night before, and he wasn't certain as to the nature of his consciousness, whether or not he was still dreaming. He needed to get up and go to work, but something didn't register. He was befuddled. He recognized that something important wasn't happening. Slowly, ever so slowly, like the city fog dissipating as the sun performed one of his many tasks, clarity dawned. He was let go yesterday. What an odd phrase, let go, as he thought, because now there was nothing for him to hold on to. There was nowhere to go, and fear replaced confusion. There was a gaping hole in his safety net. It took less than a second for the alarm bells of his psyche to work its voodoo. It became hard to breathe. His heart started racing, and suddenly his entire body was covered in sweat as every single pore leaked his anxiety. Without looking, he reached out to his left, seeking the anchor that was his wife, Shelley, but he felt nothing. Rolling over and seeing that he was alone in his bed exacerbated the trepidation. Then he smelled coffee and heard the sounds of cooking in the kitchen. He jumped out of bed, rushed to the bathroom, grabbed a towel, dried himself off. Half walking, half staggering, he returned to the bedroom and donned a pair of sweats and an undershirt that were lying on the floor by the side of the bed. Shelley was at the stove, scrambling eggs, and as he entered the kitchen, Jimmy walked up behind her, wrapped her tightly in his arms, pressed his body against hers, kissed her neck, and whispered, "I love you," in her ear. In that moment, nothing else mattered to him. He was not alone, and together they would persevere. Jimmy was not hungry, but he would not negate Shelley's efforts. He sat at the kitchen table and was immediately joined by Shelley as she sat down facing her husband. She watched as he picked at his food and slowly sipped his coffee. His normal, voracious appetite seemed to be running at quarter speed. He sat in silence with his elbows on the table. Unfocused eyes were fixed on a plate he didn't see. "There's no joy in Mudville," he whispered to himself. Shelley's heart broke for the pain that statement expressed. She needed to be there for him and to let him know that he was heard and that she understood. She reached across the table and placed one hand atop his. "You were tossing and turning quite a bit last night. Pleasant dreams, I assume?" she said with a half smile he never saw. Jimmy's back prickled. His eyes left the plate to look at Shelley. Then he saw the look of concern on her face, concern for him, not for herself. And he realized her comment was meant to soothe him and not to convey her anxiety. He was not alone. This was food for his soul, not a banquet by any means, for he was incapable of seeing one, even if it was spread out before him. But it was a piece of bread for a starving man, and he consumed what energy it provided. "I don't know what to do right now," Jimmy said. "Christmas is coming, and I don't want to spoil it. I just don't know what to do." As it turned out, Grandma Jessie would have a suggestion. "You should take a nice long walk and see what the world has to offer." Jimmy was caught off guard by this suggestion and didn't see how this would help, but decided to do it anyway. So there he was, standing on a sidewalk without a clue as to where he should go. "Don't shit on yourself," another Grandma Jessie gem that he heard Shelley whisper in his head. And with that thought, he turned to his right and took one step and then another. If he had been thinking, or if he had any awareness at the time, he might have realized that this was the start of his journey of 1,000 miles. As his meanderings began with his head down and focused on nothing but that which was directly under his nose, he saw a sidewalk mosaic composed of cracks, uneven surfaces, dirt, oil stains, smeared dog feces, and assorted garbage carried by the wind that found a temporary resting place not far from his door. The realization that this was his neighborhood was not a pleasant thought. It was a middle-class district, formerly a run-down, ramshackle neighborhood that had been gentrified 40 years earlier. It was the city's last refuge of affordable housing that was no longer within reach of the average worker. Jimmy was aghast. He forced his head to look up at his surroundings, and for the first time he noticed the soot-covered stucco and the peeling paint on the wood trim of many of the homes around him. His mind went to his own home and how he often put off the required maintenance. There never seemed to be enough money or time with the 60-hour-plus work weeks and inflation dwindling away at his buying power. Over the last few years, he had even reduced his retirement contributions to make ends meet. Reasons or excuses, he couldn't sort them out. He picked up his pace and tried to keep his head up. Up hills or down hills, nothing much changed. There was a bus so covered in grime and graffiti that the female face that adorned the ad space was barely recognizable. Was it always this way? Maybe, but it's gotten worse. The powers that be claim budget cuts are due to lack of funds, but there's more money now than there ever has been. Where does it go? Jimmy's anger reappeared. The nickel ride my father paid for now cost $1. It's a big increase over one generation. City fathers blame it on the cost of labor, but a bus driver used to be able to afford a home in the city and now can't afford one in the suburbs an hour and a half away. They blame it on the cost of fuel and insurance, but that's just another example of the rich slurping up every nickel and dime from the public trough. There's excuse after excuse with a vague relationship to the truth, but these are in fact lies of evasion. And with that thought his anger swelled. The strife and the grief that accompanied his strides that morning mushroomed through the cracks and shadows of the cityscape like a poisoned delicacy, and it made him want to vomit. This wasn't the order and structure he expected from the bastion of affluence in the greatest country of the world. He had opinions on why it was so, but he knew he really didn't know. And as his anger slipped into exhaustion, he withdrew. In this state, mentally and emotionally, hurled in on himself, he continued on, one foot in front of the other. An odd thing happened, though, in retrospect. Not so odd, and actually quite common. A change in perspective made it odd. He was making more progress in the cars. Nothing was moving. Cars filled every inch of the intersection, denying access to those with a green light. The law was clear. Don't enter the intersection without room on the other side. However, this law could not compete with the law of self-interest when there is competition for that room, and competition is directly proportional to the density of the traffic. The irony that competition added to the density was lost on most drivers, and those who understood the relationship were rewarded with the sound of a horn and a curse, or two or three. Jimmy was glad to be on his feet, currently a much easier mode of transportation, so he walked through the intersection, following the path between bumpers, and continued on his journey. A half-mile further, with his mind still on the congestion he had left behind, Jimmy experienced another new normal. It was a smell that broke through his senses, body odor and human feces. Then he realized what he had drifted into, where the wind, like the garbage in the street, had blown him to, so to speak. The homeless encampment seemed to go on for blocks. There were tents of assorted colors for the lucky, fortunate ones, cardboard boxes for the less so, and a cardboard blanket for some, and for many more, just a place on the pavement where they could sleep the day away in relative warmth, because without a box or a tent, there was no sleeping at night. He hadn't realized that his feet had taken him off the sidewalk and into the street, where he was safer and less likely to trip over an unconscious body. He looked out at the sea of toothless faces, aged with wrinkles as if carved by waves that eroded the body as well as the soul, and gradually dragged everything below the surface, leaving behind only a pittance of what existed before. Rocks ground in the sand. There was a look of despair on most, anger on some, predatory determination on a few. Those were the alphas among the lowly. Grungy clothes and stringy, oily hair covered in part by someone's old discarded baseball cap was not a fashion statement but a way of life. Eyes reflected little hope, and the yearning for the next meal, drink, or high was evident everywhere. A lot of these people, and he caught himself with a sense of discomfort at the words, these people, have mental issues and need institutional help. Others have abuse issues and need a way back. There are those who made a few mistakes and have had a few bad breaks and just can't find a way out. Then there are those who prefer it this way and don't want to be imprisoned by the system. But how can we let this happen and let it get so out of hand? No one wants to live like this other than a few who claim they prefer this life. Not the vast majority of the people living here, the citizens of this community. The politicians Each and every one of them expressed empathy or disdain, but never seemed to act on their convictions one way or another. This is the most affluent area in the most affluent state in the most affluent country in the history of the world. Why can't we do better? Well, he knew, and yet he didn't know well enough to stand up before a jury as an expert witness, where the law overrode common sense. And common sense said that the people who make the laws or pay to have them made maximize their affluence within a very tight range of the status quo. And doing better means making it better for them. Certainly not for the 99%, and no longer even for the majority. And that's a crime. There was a sense of anger coupled with gloom in his thoughts until the fear kicked in, and yesterday's nightmare that stripped him bare reared its ugly head like a great white shark, suddenly emerging from the murk, coming in for the kill. The sense of security was wiped away as if the field paint, the grime-coated bus, the broken-down car, the cardboard blanket were images of his destiny. Jimmy turned and ran all the way home, the thoughts of yesterday branded in his mind, forcing him to acknowledge a belief that he was less than. Not a little fish in a large pond, nor an empty conch shell washed up on the shore, for even that had value when held in one's ears. Not even a broken sand dollar that a child would discard for one that was whole. No, Jimmy saw his life as a grain of sand that experienced its moment in the sun, soon to be trod upon and ground beneath the surface. But that was not to be his story. And that's how chapter 1 ends.